Welcome to the Money Made Human podcast. It celebrates at its heart the work of credit unions and their vital role in enriching our lives and communities. Brought to you by First Class Credit Union, each episode features insightful discussions revealing the meaningful impact that can be made through economic collaboration. Mostly, it's a collection of compassionate conversations about navigating life and the individual journeys we take. This episode features sensitive themes and topics. If you're affected by any of the conversation, links to available support will be included in the episode description. We're trying to make money more human, so be kind to yourself as you go forward. Thanks for listening. Hello friends, hello members. Welcome to Money Made Human, a podcast by First Class Credit Union. Our special guest today is Professor Sharon Collard from the University of Bristol. Sharon is a Professor of Personal Finance and Research Co-Director in the Personal Finance Research Centre of the University. Welcome, Professor Collard. Yay.
Thank you so much, Gayle. Lovely to be here.
I can't believe it's September. How did that happen?
I know, it's suddenly gone very autumn.
It has. So I've got so many questions for you, if that's okay. Really want to talk to you about the importance of credit unions, the importance of the research that you've done around that. I know you've done quite a bit of work around gambling harm and would love to speak to you about that. And I guess I would say to anyone listening, we'll put signposts and helplines if anyone is affected by anything that we do talk about on the podcast. And I'd love to just find out more about you and your personal journey to the research centre as well, if that's okay. So yeah. Tell me about your research into credit unions, Professor. What has that looked like, and has that developed over the years?
Yeah, it's a great question, Gayle. I think so. The Personal Finance Research Centre has been going since 1998 at the University of Bristol. So we're celebrating 27 years this year.
Amazing.
And it's always had, we kind of do what it says on the tin. We do research around personal and household finances. And one of the very first topics that the centre looked at when it was set up, and I joined shortly after it was set up, was financial exclusion in the UK and ways to promote financial inclusion. And from the very start, credit unions were a really important part of both the research and the discussion and the debate around that. So I think it's been fantastic, over the course of my research career to have had the privilege to work with credit unions and get to know them better and do research with them and with others like Swoboda Research Centre who specialise in that area, and also other mutuals like we work with the Building Societies Association and individual building societies.
Sure.
So I guess the research that we've done has really focused perhaps on that particular aspect of credit unions around their role in promoting financial inclusion, but clearly credit unions have a much bigger role to play. I think very early on, credit unions were saying to us, we're not just a poor person's bank. We don't want to be seen like that. We're something much bigger. And obviously the sector is made up of is quite diverse. So I think that's the things that we've looked at. But obviously appreciating that credit unions offer so much more than that. And just bringing it right up to date, actually, in the past 2 years at Bristol, we've been working with some other universities looking at innovation adoption amongst smaller financial services firms. And it's been fantastic that we've had really great engagement from credit unions. So I think that just shows, that brings it right up to date, really, in terms of that appetite to innovate and change in ways that work for members.
Of course. And why was the university keen to set up an institute around personal finance? Was there a meaning behind that, or funding, or how did that come about?
Well, actually, I think the origins of it were the links with economic geography. So some of the economic geographers at Bristol, and in particular Professor Nigel Thrift and Andrew Lation, were looking at financial exclusion, particularly from what was happening with banks and building societies. And our founder of the research centre, Professor Elaine Kempson, was at that time doing work on household finances, and was invited to come to Bristol and set up a research centre looking specifically at that, because there was a lot of kind of complementarity between the areas.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, I think geography has been a great home for us, really, because it's quite multidisciplinary. So that was really the idea behind it. The Personal Finance Research Centre has always been entirely self-funding. So that means that we raise money to keep ourselves in work from a whole bunch of different sources. Sometimes it's charities and foundations. In the past, it's been government, sometimes on things like exclusion. And sometimes we work with kind of the private sector, such as trade bodies and so on.
And you know, I can't help but think it's a really important part of research because, well, it feels tricky out there just now in terms of personal finance. I think everyone is, you know, noticing the difference in grocery prices, for example. And it does feel tough as we head into another winter and another, you know, Christmas on the horizon. I guess that's an important part of what you might look at as well in terms of personal finance and the implication to all of us as a, you know, a population.
I think that's absolutely right, Gayle, and I think it's really interesting, but it's also quite sad that some of the issues that I started off looking at in 1998 are still issues now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think particularly, you know, when we had this extraordinary event, which was the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of was a real, I think, a wake-up call to, you know, what money people have and how they manage and how to mitigate that in that extraordinary situation. But we know from our research and others' research that there were some groups of people who were doing really, you know, having a really difficult time before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
That got worse for them during the pandemic. It wasn't an equal experience in the pandemic financially. And then after the pandemic, it got worse actually because of the cost of living crisis. And we've been kind of talking about it now as the cost of living is a perma crisis. It's been going on for several years now.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who were affected back in, you know, at the beginning of the century are still being worst impacted now. So I think it's a really good point. We have to remember that, you know, the economy goes up and down, but there are some groups who are much worse affected, and that's a kind of cumulative effect, really.
Mm-hmm. I guess we're hoping that credit unions can help some of that. We can't fix it all, but we certainly want to be here for all of our members. And I guess I wanted to ask you, what's your view on the importance of credit unions in society and across the UK? We're trying to grow. We're trying to tell more people that we're here to help. But I suppose it's two questions. What's your view on the impact credit unions can make, and how do we help more people?
Yeah, I think those are really great questions, Gail. I think you know, credit unions are an important part of the UK financial services landscape, I think. Um, and it's a bit like us being based in geography. You know, they're very place-based. Often they serve particular geographical communities or communities in terms of where people work. And I think they're kind of the unsung heroes, really, aren't you, of financial services, because people, I think, when we've done research with credit union members, what comes through really strongly is um, how much value people put on being a member of a credit union and the services that it provides, and the different type of relationship that people have with credit unions. I think those are all really important, particularly at a time when we're moving away from kind of relational financial services so much. And for some people that works well, doing things online and not having so much interaction can work well for people. But also, I think we shouldn't forget that very relationship-based and trust-based interaction that credit unions are so good at is still really important. And not just, we're not just talking about, traditionally you'd think, oh, well, it's older people who want to do things face to face, or it's this type of person. But I think it's true for all different types of people. Yeah. Not everybody, all young people will be comfortable using technology. They want to go and talk to somebody. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that part of credit unions' journey is about innovation and offering, more digital services. But I think that your foundation remains really strong in terms of that kind of very personal relationship.
I love what you've just said there. It kind of sums up where we're at. You may notice our Money Made Human slogan in the background, and we're almost fully digital now. We don't do, I can't think of the last time we kind of did a transaction using hard currency, but we want our members to know that if they need us, we're here, even with the digital expansion and technology advancing. We're here and we're human and we're willing. And, I think that kind of just sums up everything you've just said about credit unions and that the need for personal connection.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about ethos, isn't it, Gayle? Yeah. Really, it's about where you kind of fundamentally are coming from as a community of credit unions, and I think that's really important. Even as things move on and kind of out of necessity, you need to move on. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And just thinking about your second point about the second question about reaching more people, I think that's always been a challenge, hasn't it? And I think there has been growth, which has been fantastic. I think my personal feeling is that the UK is quite a tricky place for this, because we have a lot of financial services, and some of them,
which is good.
Yes, but some of them better than others. But I think perhaps the fact that there is so much choice, and some of those, particularly in the lending space and the credit space, there's been pretty aggressive marketing in the past and very strong promotion, and that have sucked people into some forms of borrowing which perhaps were not best for them, and in some cases actually harmful. So I think it's quite difficult in that very crowded space to kind of grow. But I think some of the things that are happening at the moment are really exciting. So as I mentioned, the work Bristol's been leading with other universities, including Glasgow and Glasgow Caledonian up in Scotland, has been looking at this kind of adoption of innovation as a way to grow and to do things like engage with younger people. And I think the thing that has been really interesting about that, and I think partly answers your question about how to attract more people, is it has been bringing credit unions together from the UK, but also from the Republic of Ireland, to actually spend decent amounts of time together and working quite intensively together on particular challenges and issues. And I think just having the space to do that is quite unusual. And so I think more of that is really important, because individual credit unions and across the sector there's great stuff happening, but I think the impression we've got is that there's not always the opportunity to come together and actually share that and talk about it in a safe space where you can say, well, we tried this and it didn't work. And so I think that's been really interesting, and I think there's been some really interesting collaborations coming out of that, just with credit unions sharing knowledge and with other smaller financial services firms as well.
Will your work change in terms of research into credit unions, for example? Will that continue, or will there be new themes that you'll look at in the future? I guess you want to keep researching into it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I mean, we're partly, um, we don't have the luxury always of deciding we need to find funding to do the research that we do. But certainly, credit unions will always remain very close to our hearts, I think. And being based in Bristol, we have Great Western Credit Union here,
Mm-hmm.
which we've always had very close relationships with. And actually, my colleague Sarah was on the board for a long time.
Brilliant.
And so I think we will always maintain that interest and do research where we can. As I say, we have collaborated with Swoboda Research Centre, who I'm sure some of your listeners will know, who specialise in research in this area. And that's been great because it's always nice to collaborate with experts in an area. So
For sure. I don't know if this is a silly question or not, but the government in their manifesto have said they're keen to double the size of the mutual sector. And I guess we're unsure of what the detail is in that, or if there is detail. But I do, and this is, I guess, the silly part of the question, is there a place for them to tell their constituents about the positive impact of credit unions? I guess I'm thinking to some of the health campaigns we've run in the past around having your fruit and veg per day, and is there almost a health message around it, because we are so impactful, not in just serving our members, but the way we serve our communities and the social impact work we do.
I think that's
Can they
just to
tell?
say,
Can they
Gayle.
tell people?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I would say there's no such thing as a silly question. And secondly, I think you've raised a really, really interesting point, because I think in the last, I don't know, maybe it was linked to the pandemic, but in the last 5 years or so, I think there's been much more acknowledgement and much more interest in the intersection between money and health.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah,
absolutely, and so
yeah,
when the government talks about productivity at a very high level, I think our
yeah,
response is, well, okay, you've got populations who are financially struggling, that has
yep,
impacts on their health, naturally that is going to have impacts on their productivity. And I don't feel those two things are perhaps brought together enough.
yep,
So absolutely, I think there is scope to look at some of that, as you say, public messaging, and also partnerships with, local health partnerships, and
mm-hmm.
bringing money and aspects of money into that. That might be credit unions, it might be debt advice, it might be money guidance, and
Yeah,
making that accessible to people. For example, in health environments, I think would be really important. And I think, yeah, um, I think the issue maybe for politicians is that they've got a lot of, a whole bunch of agendas. But if
of
they could
course.
keep, I think the important thing is to keep saying the message. It's not enough to say it once; they need to keep
No,
saying it. Um, and I guess there's other, if you're, I appreciate that one of the challenges for credit unions perhaps is that you're really successful in having junior savers and savings clubs in schools, but once young children transitioned into young adulthood, how do you hold on to them
retain
as
them.
members?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think the digital transformation will really help with that. But it's, I guess, as also thinking about what, you know for younger generations, their relationship with money and how they use money is so different to
Mm-hmm.
what we're doing, and how that affects how they think about money. So I think there's probably something around making sure that credit unions and all of us, including researchers, understand what that means in practice. And the Money and Pension Service actually have done some really interesting work on digital money and young people in relation to financial education. But I think it's also relevant generally to really understanding, where do young people get their information, what what are markers of trust for them. So
Yeah.
we've got like financial influencers on social media who perhaps, a young person might say, well, I really trust that person on Instagram because they've got, a 500,000 followers. But actually, that person may have no credentials at all for what they're saying. So I think it's a really tricky thing, but I think we need to try and really understand what's going on for young people to be attractive to them.
It's such an important point, and we're probably now seeing the generation coming through that have had social media their whole lives, and what is the impact of that? And I guess that's why we want to again double down on the money made human part. That whilst the young people think they're connected online, we want to show them what that really looks like, up close. We think that's an important part of the journey ahead. Uh,
Yeah.
but Professor Collard, you mentioned there about the link between good health and financial well-being as well. One of the things that we can see has an impact on mental well-being, for example, can be poor mental well-being around gambling harm and the financial consequences of that. And I know you've done quite a lot of important work on that. And I wondered what your research has looked like and what perhaps credit unions can do or offer to anyone that is suffering that harm just now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Gail. And I think perhaps gambling problems are, at root so strongly linked to money and finances as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Um, I mean, I do think so. Harmful gambling is how we would think about it is when somebody has an urge to gamble continuously, despite the harmful consequences, or
Mm-hmm.
even if they have a desire to stop, they can't. So it's just that it's not being able to stop, even though harm is happening. And I think the important thing, I mean, I guess, like other issues, like substance abuse issues, harm not only happens to the person who's got the problem with gambling, but it can also affect their close family, their friends, and other people around them. So it has this kind of knock-on ripple effect of harm, which I think makes it really important to look at. But also, you know, gambling harm is something that can affect anyone. It
Mm-hmm.
happens at any age.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, young people are at risk. It can affect men and women, people who are transgender, and it can happen to anybody from any ethnic background. So I think sadly, it doesn't discriminate in terms of gambling harm. Um, and I guess the three big issues, the three big areas of harm that happen if people have gambling problems are interconnected. So it's a lot around money and resources. So spending all of their money on gambling because that's what they feel they need to keep doing it, whatever the consequences, and perhaps borrowing as a result of that and getting into debt and the issues that can cause, and that having knock-on impacts on their own well-being, on relationships, and on health. So that it's really interconnected, I think. Um, and the economic and social burden of gambling is really quite high, and sadly part of that is related to the societal costs associated with suicide, where people
Mm-hmm.
um, kill themselves because of gambling problems.
It's horrific, isn't it? It's so hard to hear that. What if someone was listening to this that is suffering from a gambling addiction? What could they do if they were keen to get some help? Where can they go? What should they do?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think that applies to people who are worried about someone who they think might be having an issue with gambling. I mean, there's a national gambling helpline, which is usually the first port of call for people
Mm-hmm.
um, and that can, that's a first step towards understanding what's going on and what help might be available to them. There are lots of services now available in regionally. We have much more, many more NHS gambling clinics now, although I think not in Scotland at the moment. In England, we have some.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the other thing is that, it's a bit like when people are, Gayle, you and the credit union will know this, when people are experiencing problems with money and debt, it takes us such a lot to take that first step and kind of pick up the phone to somebody and actually speak about it. And it can take quite a long time for people to recognize that it's a problem. I would say that's true of both debt and where people have gambling problems. So it's really, I guess, understanding when somebody does open up, that's taken a lot to do that, and being able to respond. And I think credit unions are, somewhere where, if somebody might disclose an issue to a credit union, so the credit union kind of needs to be prepared to deal with that. But I guess also we've done some work with Swoboda, as I mentioned earlier, and about 20 credit unions looking at, how can credit unions better support, or how can credit unions support members where they think there's a risk of a gambling problem. And I think one of the things that we absolutely recognise is that's not easy.
No.
But what people who've experienced gambling problems and gambling harms tell us is that, their banks or their financial institutions have a window into what's happening with them financially. So you can see perhaps what's happening with transactions when credit unions are assessing people for loans, for example, or they can see how often people are applying for loans. So there is a window there into what's happening for people that could open up a conversation. But as I said, I completely recognise that's a really tricky step.
Yeah.
And the work that we did with Swoboda was putting together a practical guide and just look and talk at kind of giving examples of what credit unions are doing, case studies of how they've approached some of this, just to share. It comes back to the point of sharing and collaborating, to show that there are things that credit unions can do. That, as I say, they're not easy, but there's some practical examples in the guide, just to help credit unions think through some of this. It might be around how they make lending decisions, or it might be about having tricky conversations with members where there's an inkling of a problem. But I guess the other point that it's probably worth thinking. When I was thinking about this podcast, Gayle, I was thinking it can happen to anybody. So equally, it could be credit union staff or volunteers who might be having some of these issues.
Of course. And I think to add to what you've said, we're a safe place for anyone to talk to us about that. We can signpost and offer guidance and helplines. And I would say to anyone listening that they're likely not alone in this situation. Many people will be facing it,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting. I think I mean, I've come into gambling harms research through its link with personal finance. So I'm not a gambling harms researcher by background, but it's really interesting how when we do research on that topic, it chimes with anybody that you speak to. And sadly, very often people know somebody who's been through that experience, or they've been through that experience themselves. And so it's one of those kind of, it levels the playing field, I think, because sadly it is common, but perhaps we're only starting to talk about it a bit more now.
Which is a good thing. And I think not necessarily for credit unions, but if you look at the large retail banks, many of them will have a blocking facility now that might be helpful to anyone that's has an issue with gambling at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Gayle, because the as I mentioned earlier, taking that step to pick up the phone and speak to somebody, or there's online chat as well, which might help break down some of those access barriers. But there are also things that people can do, like you rightly say, banks now offer bank card gambling blocks to help people, if they want to stop spending on gambling for a period of time. There's also self-exclusion software but just to help people stop online gambling. So there are some things, I think they're all in the guide actually, that people can do themselves. And sometimes it's a case of building up those sort of protective layers of, how do I stop, once you've recognized it's a problem, how do I put things in place to help me manage it? And I think that's really important, that there are things that people can do themselves without having to talk to anybody else. And there's some great resources online as well. So, as I say, the National Gambling Helpline, Gamble Aware, which is the national charity, has some great resources, GamCare as well. So there are places out there, but it's like debt advice, and people often don't know what's out there, and they don't know what it offers. So it's a whole range of things. It's information. You can talk to somebody. You can web chat with somebody, and for people who need kind of more intensive treatment and support, those options are out there as well.
Which is great to know. And as I mentioned, as a credit union, we offer a non-judgmental, safe place to anyone listening. It's such an emotive subject that it likely deserves a podcast all of its own to talk about that and the dynamics of it. But I appreciate you telling us about your research in that regard. What about your own journey, Professor Collard? What's brought you to the university and then onwards to develop so much research into personal finance? What do you enjoy about that?
Gosh, that's a tricky question, Gayle. So I guess my research career started quite late in the day. I was a mature university student, so I graduated when I was in my early 30s, and I did a degree in social policy and administration, which is like all areas of social life. So housing, employment, social security. I had a great time. It was a subject that I love. And as part of that, I did a 1-year placement at a research institute in London. And I worked on it was actually issues of, it was around crime and criminology. But when I graduated, I still had some links with people at the Institute, and actually the founder of the Personal Finance Research Centre came from that same institute. So when she and colleagues set up the centre at Bristol, I was lucky enough to see an advert for a job as an administrator stroke researcher. And I just kind of worked my way up, actually, with Elaine's great mentorship and friendship. So yeah, it was a bit of luck, really. I think a bit of being in the right place at the right time, and just it's a subject that there are so many facets to it. And while some of as I mentioned earlier, some of the issues are kind of perennial, and there are things that just don't go away because there'll always be issues, like sadly poverty. But there is always something. We've been really lucky in that we've been able to research some really, really interesting and important topics, and make a difference actually as well. Some being able to make sure that research can have an impact, I think, has been great. And the other part of the job actually that I love is being able to collaborate with lots of other organisations like credit unions and like other research organisations. We've done a lot of work with debt advice services, and it's just, you're the experts, so much about your organisations, the members that you work with, and that's so incredibly valuable. And it's always quite humbling actually to speak to individuals and organisations and learn more about what's happening for them.
It's funny because you talk about it in terms of academic research, but it sounds like a people business, to be honest. You know, it's multifaceted and you're talking to so many different groups and populations. And I just wondered, you come across as a great human. How has that been built? Where has those values come from? And who's inspired you along the way?
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you, Gayle. I guess, I think I've always been really interested in these topics around, not that I would have articulated them in this way when I was younger, but issues of inequality and social justice, I think, have always been something that I've been interested in. And that kind of amplified when I did my degree. And then I think our founder, Elaine Kempson, has been an amazing mentor, and she's a very committed and tenacious person. So I think she was a great inspiration, because Elaine has an amazingly a sense of social justice, and it will really, I think she's like a dog with a bone. She won't let it go.
We need people like that. Yeah.
So I think, but also I think, as I mentioned, when we do research and we talk to, whether they're individual consumers, credit union members, or credit unions as organizations, or anybody that we talk to, it's always, it's an ongoing learning process, and it's always refreshing and learning and building on what we know. And I think that's a real inspiration, actually. The people that we speak to are an inspiration always, and the things that they have to experience and the things that they've overcome. And if we can, we're researchers, so we can.
You're storytellers.
Yeah, I guess our aim is to try and use those stories to improve things for people, and sometimes they land and sometimes they don't, but we hope that ultimately there is some positive feedback from that for people.
I think we really need that just now with the cost of living crisis, and as I said earlier, people are struggling. We need those stories to be captured to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's been, in the last couple of years, my colleague Sarah has led some work looking at working with Trussell, the food bank network, looking at, they deliver debt and other money advice within their food bank network. And that was really eye-opening, because having gone through the pandemic and lots of things going online, including research, it was really clear that the people using the food bank were not always online at all. And actually, if we wanted to get their views, we need to go and talk to them in the food bank. And when we did surveys with them, we needed to give them a paper survey to fill out. And that was I think it was a moment where we went, okay, we don't talk to everybody if we only do it online. We have got to take that into account. And it's really tricky, isn't it? Because online is cheaper. It's more accessible in many ways, but it also means that we're missing out voices that are really important and that often don't get heard. So I think that was a real wake-up call for us about, we really need to think about how do we make sure that we're capturing all voices. And I think that's something that credit unions do incredibly well. You know your members really well, and you communicate really well with them. And I think that's great learning for us to take away.
Well, thank you. Professor Collard, at the end of our podcast, we ask a random selection of questions that come from our team. If that's
okay. Yeah.
So we've got numbers 1 to 5, if you want to choose a number.
Oh, okay. I'll go for 4.
Number 4. Good question. What is the most enjoyable project you've ever worked on?
Oh gosh. Ah, that's a great question. Most enjoyable one. It's quite hard to pick between them. I think the oh gosh. Oh, that's I don't I'm gonna
Might it be a subject matter? Is there a subject matter you love getting your teeth into?
I guess yeah, some of the what have we been doing? I mean, one of the things I have really enjoyed actually less about the subject and well, it's partly about the subject and partly about what we did, but we've recently been working with some a debt advice organization looking at debt advice referral pathways,
Mhm,
including from organizations like credit unions, but also energy suppliers and how to make that better. And one
mhm,
of the lovely things that we did last year was to run some workshops with a whole range of stakeholders from the debt advice sector, from energy, from different kind of charities and organizations. And we originally thought we would do them online for the reasons, accessible and, uh, cost efficient. And then we went, do you know what? We're going to do them in person.
mhm,
And they were amazing. Just
mhm,
like I was so humbled and gratified at we had about 20 people at each one,
mhm,
which and what I really loved about it was that you could tell there was this lovely vibe in the room of people who perhaps didn't always get an opportunity to talk to each other,
mhm,
sectors that perhaps didn't always have an opportunity to come together, coming together and being able to, as you said earlier, Gail, in a kind of safe space, have a discussion, quite open and honest, and there was some quite frank exchanges of views about what was happening.
mhm,
And that was just, I think we came away from everyone going, that was great. We were so pleased that we did them in person. And I think everybody who attended got something out of it. So that doesn't quite answer the question about what the topic. The topic's really important, and it also gave us a lot of insight into the mechanics of how organizations work and how their processes work, which I think sometimes we as researchers kind of say, oh, well, we're going to recommend X, Y, and Z. But if it's not practical for an organization to do that, it's never going to happen. So I
mhm,
think it gave us some real insight into the nuts and bolts of how um, essential services and debt advice operate and what's possible and not possible. But also just that opportunity to bring people together.
mhm.
It was so invigorating. It was fantastic.
The connectedness.
It really was.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I
Mhm,
think I hadn't really, I think maybe because we did three in a fairly short period of time and spent, time doing it, and they kind of evolved each time.
mhm,
So yeah, that was a real, as I say, I think it's a really good point actually, Gail. It's the connectedness point, which you get
mhm.
some of online,
Yeah,
but it was just
it's not the same.
different. Yeah.
Give me another number, Professor. We've got
Okay, I'll go for two.
number two. Oh,
I'll have to remember which ones I've answered now.
this is more of a technical question. So, how can credit unions prepare for changes in the economy like inflation or recession? How do we best prepare for, I guess, what can be the roller coaster of the economy?
Yeah. I guess there's two aspects to that, isn't there? There's, what could credit unions do in terms of supporting members who are affected, and what can credit unions do themselves as organizations?
Mm-hmm,
I mean, I guess from an organizational perspective, it's about I get ultimately there's only so much you can do to prepare
mm-hmm,
because it can be really difficult to see what's coming down the line. But I guess some degree of horizon scanning to
mm-hmm,
think what might be happening. I guess part of that could be, who have you got on your board? Do you have somebody who can kind of take the lead on that and keep an eye. I guess from a board perspective as well, things like regular strategy reviews and coming together to think about those issues and do things like, SWOT analyses and the different types of analyses that you can do. I think is really important, and making sure that policies and strategies are as up to date as they can be, and making sure they're kind of live documents, I guess. And I guess that then feeds into, okay, well, what does that mean for member services and how we serve our members in terms of the products we offer them? Is there, I guess, at certain points of times, now being one of them, sadly, is there a place for things like emergency loans or helping people to access other support that's out there? So I guess that's how I would see it from that perspective.
We would totally agree. We removed all our fees last year just to help members transact with us, save with us, borrow without paying anything. So I totally agree with you. And then you were going to talk about what members perhaps could do to prepare.
Yeah, so I guess it could be things like just making sure that credit unions perhaps could have information on the websites, which is around what government support is available, pointing people to tools like the kind of benefit calculator tools and income maximization tools and things like that. So I guess it's equipping members to know what's out there, which I think is really important, as we talked about earlier, and perhaps also, helping members to understand, because we work in the sector, don't we, Gayle? So we kind of know what the ecosystem looks like and what it is. But if you don't work in it, you won't have a clue what debt advice is, and you might think, well, that sounds something that's a bit scary. And so I think maybe there's a role for credit unions in breaking down some of the barriers to that, in terms of, what does this actually mean? Why would it benefit people to get help with money?
It's that safe place again, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah, I think one of the things people can be really worried about is, if I go and get help, is that going to affect my access to credit in the future, or my credit score at a time when things are already hard? So I think it's being honest about that with people, really, and honest with yourselves about, okay, well, what might the impacts be?
And in most cases, there is a solution to all of these issues. There will be a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was something in the press recently about how the extent of benefits that people don't claim. So,
Absolutely.
it's just like that could make a massive difference to people if they're eligible. So I think it's just trying to build public knowledge that as you rightly say, Gayle, there is help out there. We probably can provide a solution in some way.
And most credit unions will have a benefits calculator embedded in their system somewhere.
Exactly.
Give me one last number.
Okay, I will go for 5. Let's go to the top.
Oh,
I'm hoping I picked an easy one.
I'm not sure, but it's a great question. What's the best lesson you have ever learned in your working life or personal life? What's your best lesson?
I think the best lesson I've learned is never take anything for granted, and don't ever make assumptions, because I think from a research perspective, it's like, if you go in with assumptions, they're usually completely flattened. So yeah, I think not making assumptions, being really open-minded about things, and showing some humility about other people's experiences and situations.
That sounds like Money Made Human, for sure. Professor Collard, it's been such a pleasure to meet with you today and chat through those issues. Can I say a huge thank you to you and the personal finance research faculty and to the University of Bristol as well. Pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Gayle.
Thanks for listening to the Money Made Human podcast. We're grateful to spend time with you and hope you enjoyed it. If you want to join a credit union, choose us. With love, until the next time, First Class Credit Union.